Well, hi again. Thanks for popping by. It's Mr. Bleeker here. In this lesson, we're going to focus on the fetal circulatory system and get an overview for how babies respire. Now, I need to predicate this a little bit. I just want to go to this tab here. Take me here. The fact that babies, when they are in the amniotic sac, um, are incapable of breathing oxygen. They can't get it from amniotic fluid. As the lungs begin to develop, the lungs will exercise, babies will inhale the fluid, but it's insufficient. You obviously can't respire from that fluid. You can't get oxygen from it, and you can't sufficiently expel carbon dioxide into it. So fetal lungs are just practicing. Now they will take over once the baby is born. Once those lungs drain of fluid, and once you begin to respire atmospheric or gaseous quantities of oxygen and release carbon dioxide, babies will go a bright pink, especially considering they have a form of hemoglobin. It's an infantile form of hemoglobin, neonatal hemoglobin, which has a very high affinity for oxygen. And that you see that in part when babies take their first breath and they go so pink so quickly. Now, we've got a lot to this, so we'll dive right in. Now, instead of diving into the notes, what I want to do here is show you what babies actually breathe through. And yes, it does look like quite a mess, but this is an extremely important organ for our survival. This is the placenta. And you can see just at first glance how many blood vessels, just how vascular this structure is. And this right here is what connects to the baby. Okay, so this is connected to the mother, and this is your umbilical cord, which connects to, well, yes, your belly button. But what's inside are what we call the umbilical arteries and the umbilical veins. So this structure right here you can think of as being the lungs that you used when you were in the womb. Now, they're not lungs per se. You're not respiring with oxygen. You're actually breathing through the systemic side of your body. When we studied the heart, we talked about pulmonary and we talked about systemic, but I was talking about once you've been born. Now, for the unborn, in this case, when you're in the womb, you have to breathe through your systemic side. And we'll look at that in some detail right here. Let's just make it a little bit bigger. There we go. So this blue sac here is the amniotic sac, and that's the amniotic membrane in light blue around the outside. And you can see the umbilical cord right here, and it contains the umbilical artery and the umbilical vein. We'll talk in quite a bit of detail about what they do. Around the outside, this is the uterus, which expands as the baby grows in size, or babies. It's amazing just what the capacity of this is. But this structure right here is a wondrous structure, and that's the placenta right there. Now, this is an ideal location for the placenta. I'll tell you why. It's above the baby, and it's not down here. If the placenta were down here, the baby would not be able to be born through it. That's a low-lying placenta, and you would have to take the baby by C-section, essentially cutting a hole in the uterus and removing the baby manually from the uterus, a cesarean section. But this placenta is in an ideal location, and you can see the baby's blood vessels are going to sneak through this, and they're going to insert into the placenta, and then there's this huge surface area that you can see here. Now, this zooms in on it, and you can see that what you have is the umbilical cord really is a delivery system for the umbilical arteries and the umbilical vein. Now, I have to show you something. Take a look at umbilical arteries and notice what color they are. They're blue. Now, these arteries are, of course, leading away from the baby's heart. Think of these arteries as going, as if, well, I guess in the counterpart, our pulmonary arteries lead away from our heart, but they head to the lungs. They're searching for oxygen, right? So when we look at any sort of oxygen exchange system, arteries or veins, the colors that you would expect are backwards. Usually we expect arteries to have arterial or red blood in them. Well, refreshed blood, oxygenated blood. But in any sort of oxygen exchange system, the reason why blood is leading away from the heart is it's going to get refreshed. And then it comes back to the heart to be pumped out to the body. So this vein will lead back to the umbilical vein, which is red here, will lead back to the heart with its payload of sort of invigorated blood. As you follow this up, you'll notice the umbilical veins, they head into these small systems right in here, and you can see all this surface area, and they seem to get renewed right here, refreshed. And these are basically these are capillary systems. And then when you come back through these little venules here, you get into the major veins, of course, and then you lead back, and that is going to lead back here, just like this arrow is pointing to, back to the fetal heart. Quite a bit to look at. I think the most important thing to point out to you is that the baby's blood and the mother's blood never, ever mixes. And you can see there's an obvious reason for me making that point. One, it's just anatomically correct. And two, if the blood types mixed, imagine this, that the baby is type B blood and the mother is type A. Well, that would be a fatal situation for both participants. So that's not exactly what, that's not at all what happens in the placenta. We'll check this out. I love this animation. I've used this in class many, many times. And what it's showing, we'll focus in a little bit here. I like to do a little zoom. Is here are your umbilical arteries. Now, if you follow this, the umbilical arteries are going to lead into sort of these sinuses here. And this is really good. It simplifies it quite a bit. The umbilical arteries come in, and as they get very close to the mother's blood vessels, they are reinvigorated and oxygenated. And those white little balls you see there is when the baby's blood vessels pick up oxygen by being very close to the mother. So this sort of light purple side here, this is the mother delivering through the uterine lining the oxygen, and here are uterine veins that will think of it as taking the bad stuff away. I know that's an oversimplification, but by bad stuff, what we mean, if we follow these little black dots, that's carbon dioxide. Those are waste products. That's urea. So things diffuse. Now, you got to be very careful with that. Things diffuse. So pollutants diffuse out of the baby's system into the mother's because the mother can process them. Mom breathes out that carbon dioxide. Mom's liver processes urea and other waste products formed by the baby. And then mom, as she's breathing, right here, saturates the area with oxygen, and that's what the baby's blood vessels pick up. It's a wondrous system. It sort of looks like this octopus that implanted into the uterine lining. This uterine lining was built up by the steady rise of estrogen when we studied the reproductive system. And the reason the mom's uterus was built up, it becomes highly vascularized, was for the possibility of a baby, a developing organism, I should say, a neonate, implanting the placental, these are called villi, into the uterine wall. So what does that all mean? This basically means that this structure hooked into the uterine lining and is receiving oxygen and getting rid of waste products like carbon dioxide and other things. And that's really how it works. The point is, when the renewed blood goes back, as it's leading back to the heart, that's a vein. So this is just like a pulmonary vein, if you think about it, because it's taking renewed blood back to the heart to be pumped around to the system. That's pretty neat stuff. So we should now focus in on the circulatory system of the baby. It's a very interesting system, and now that we've had a chance to sort of look here, we know the placenta is lying in this area. So what's going on? let's take a more in-depth analysis. Okay. So what we'll do here is we're going to focus in on area number 1. Okay. So this is the renewed blood coming back through the umbilical vein. Okay, and you can see what's kind of interesting is this is mom's, or sorry, this is the baby's inferior vena cava. Now the inferior vena cava, as you recall, is leading back to the heart. Now, vena cavas are usually sort of blue in appearance, right? Because normally when you lead back to the heart, you're leading the blood back for a recharge. Well, because this organism, this unborn baby, hasn't come into the world yet, renewed blood is coming from the umbilical vein and it's plumbed right into the inferior vena cava. That doesn't happen in us. When you're born, the umbilical vein atrophies, withers, and it's gone. So this is very interesting. You can see the mixing of the sort of the tired blood, and you get highly oxygenated blood coming from the umbilical vein, and you don't see that in us, not in adults, and in babies. This structure fades very quickly. Okay, so let's look at what part 2 is. That part 1 is just the umbilical vein plumbed into the inferior vena cava. This structure right here is the first of 3 bypasses that you must know. What you're doing is it's a little bypass that goes past the liver and just hooks right into the inferior vena cava. So we say it's a duct. And because this is a major duct, it came off this umbilical vein. It's termed the Ductus Venosus. Now, if you think about it, why didn't this go through the liver? Is it no filtration has to happen here? And the truth is no, because this blood, the baby's not consuming anything. There's nothing really that needs to be filtered by the liver. For example, the things that we eat, our blood has to go through the liver to make sure that there's no toxins or poisons. But in this case, this is just renewed blood coming straight from the umbilical vein. This is just diffusion. So there's a little skip past the liver, because it's not really that vital anyways, through the ductus venosus. So scratch down, that's bypass number 1 of 3. Okay, we'll focus in on region number 2. Now the second bypass, if we look at the inferior vena cava here, this is just the oddest thing to see, isn't it? It's red, and that's because it's carrying oxygenated blood, courtesy of the placenta, back up to the right side of the heart. Okay. So when you come into the heart and you think about the right side of the heart, well, what use is pumping a lot of oxygenated blood to the lungs? Babies aren't breathing through their lungs at this point. You know what would be smarter? Get that oxygenated blood over to the left side, right? Get more of it, get out to the body, get it out faster. So there's a neat little structure right here. Now this structure in us doesn't exist. It's grown over, and it's called the Foramen Ovale. It's called the oval opening. It's sort of an oval shape. So as that oxygenated blood comes in, the decision basically that's been made in nature here is to sort of bypass the pulmonary system. So this almost looks like a valve, doesn't it? The Foramen Ovale is just an opening that isn't sealed over. So the oxygenated blood coming up from the vena cava goes into the right atrium, and it's sort of like saying, "Oh, to heck with the right side of the heart." The whole point is we've got to get that renewed oxygenated blood with food substances from the mother. Remember that there's not just oxygen in here. There's amino acids, there's carbohydrates, there's proteins, there's triglycerides, fats. You get the idea. Those need to get pumped around the body. And the last time I checked, the left side of the heart is the one that pumps things to the body. So the right side of the heart's its role is kind of minimized here. Some blood, of course, you see this little trail here? Some of the blood, of course, will go to the lungs. Well, we think about it. of course, the lungs are going to need oxygen, and the lungs are going to need those nutrients as well. But the lungs are just one portion of the body, and the rest of the body is waiting. So let's get the enriched blood to the systemic side and get it going. So our first bypass was here, which was called the ductus venosus. Our second bypass here is the bypass, a partial bypass, but significant, of the pulmonary system to the systemic through, and yes, you have to know it, the oval opening. It's a foramen is a word that means basically an opening, and ovale means oval shaped. There you go, a little Latin. Now, if we follow the blood, let's give it a second there. Actually, I just want to click that again because I want to watch that animation. Okay, so here it sneaks through the foramen ovale. And it goes in the left side. Now, this goes out through the aorta right here, and down it goes. Okay, so that's the aorta does take the renewed blood where it needs to go. But there is yet another bypass. We've had a bypass of the ductus venosus, we've had the foramen ovale, and it's like, well, what other bypass could there be? Well, if you look really closely, look real close. What in the heck is this? Wait a minute, hold on, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is supposed to be the pulmonary trunk, right? That's the right side of the heart. This is the systemic trunk, which is what the aorta is. Why is the pulmonary side hooked up to the systemic side? Well, that is one more bypass. Now, if you've been following along so far, you've noticed the body is doing everything it can really to maximize the systemic side or the flow of blood to the systemic side of the heart. So here we go with a few more links, a few more labels. Now let's just follow that for a second. Some of the blood that's headed out to the lungs is being intercepted. I mean, it got intercepted here, right, at the foramen ovale, but some of the blood that flows out through the pulmonary trunk doesn't go to the lungs. Oh, wait a minute, I see what's going on. That blood that could have gone out to the lungs, some sneaking back into the aorta. It's not enough that this is allowing blood over to the right, over to the systemic side. There's one more intercept to get even more blood to the systemic side. Why? Well, because the systemic side is so darn important for the developing organism. So this one right here is a little duct that sneaks over to the arterial system. It sneaks over to the aorta. That, when you're born, is basically fades, and you don't see this anymore. This doesn't exist. So a lot of these, well, not a lot of these bypasses fade within the first couple weeks of when we're born. This one here, the foramen ovale, that heals over pretty well right away, within a few days. This follows suit, and of course, this ductus venosus down here fades away. And if you wonder what it becomes, it actually becomes like a little ligament in the liver, because this is sneaking through the liver. It's just the liver itself is not doesn't really have much else to do with it. So this becomes what we call a hepatic ligament. So just a little withered structure in your liver. So that will heal over, and this will atrophy, and the pulmonary and systemic systems won't be connected anymore with this little shunt or this little bypass. Now, that's not to say some of these things don't go wrong. If this little hole in your heart right here, if it doesn't heal over, there will be sort of a backflow, sort of a squishy sound. And normally it heals over pretty well within a few days to a better part of a week or so. It should heal over right away, because when you're born, you want your right side sending blood to the lungs. Why? Well, there's no placenta anymore, so you really need to rely upon your lungs. Postnatal, what we should be seeing is right here, the ligament that forms. And you notice now that that's gone, the where the blood was shunting before, now we have a normal vena cava carrying tired blood. In the second case, right here, we want to be sending blood to the pulmonary trunk. Now this is what, if you keep your eye right here, the ductus arteriosus withers away and it's no longer significant. So the pulmonary trunk becomes exclusive. Blood flows to the lungs, no sneaking over to the aorta. That's a good idea. And the ductus venosus seals over, and you've got a right side and a left side. So you have separation of the pulmonary and systemic sides of your heart. Now the pressure, uh, the constant pressure of blood here, it eventually sort of seals this, pushes these together, and you get this sort of leftover, this little bit of a scar. Now, there was a famous boxer, Evander Holyfield. He had problems because this never quite healed over, and that's an issue if you've got blood flowing between your atria. So that's not good, but usually the increased pressure that happens when you start breathing will put enough pressure on these to seal them, and the foramen ovale becomes the fossa ovalis. You don't have to know the fossa ovalis, but it's just good to know the terminology. And this becomes the arteriosum ligament. There's a full formal name here, and you can see the changes before and after. And there you go. So this is postnatal. And here's the blood. Now that the umbilical cord is no longer in action, right? You can see that this is missing now. So there's nothing to flow to. There's no umbilical vein. This is gone. It just becomes sort of a ligament, a leftover. So there's no flow to this. And you'll see that the flow that would have been there has now ceased. So that's it. That's it. The fetal system. Fetal compared to postnatal. Now, you want to know the differences. So on the course site, these animations are listed here. The slides show information. In this case, I won't have you do the notes. I'll actually just give you the notes because you have more than enough to sort out here. So ladies and gentlemen, that's it. That's our tour of the placenta, which is systemic respiration for all intents and purposes. So thanks for coming by again. I really appreciate it. Have a good one. Ciao.